Welcome and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this international webinar series on wealth sovereign funds. This program is hosted by CDD, the Center for Mozambique, in partnership with the Moçambique, the Network for Extractive Industries. Today, and the theme of his of resource boom for Mozambique. It is quite paradoxical Posso começar? To this international webinar series on wealth sovereign fund. This is a program that is hosted by the Center for Democracy and Development, together with the Forum de Monitoria do Orçamento and the National Platform for the We have a distinguished guest, Todd Moss. He will be talking to us today on the topic, the dangers of and what lessons for Mozambique. And I was saying, it's quite paradoxical that there are dangers associated to resource boom. Many countries all over the world, they are to have an endowment from their we have learned, and we keep learning, that resources, national endowments, they can also lead to problems. They can lead to numerous conflicts, depending on how sound development and governance is in that particular country. This group of organizations, they have decided, as part of their contribution to Mozambique's exploration of its natural resources, to undertake this series of international. And the idea is to discuss and explore the extent to which the Wealth Sovereign Fund, which is being developed by Mozambique Central Bank, can not only be used for economic stabilization, but also, and importantly, it can be used for fiscal transparency. This is important because, as you will recall from the previous discussion, we were talking about possibilities, pockets of effectiveness. Yes, pockets of effectiveness in countries with a track record of good governance, countries with history of corruption, bad governance. The question is, how can policymakers insulate their extractive sector in order to be effective? How can they protect the sector from the corrupt interests that shape the ecosystem of governance? This is the contribution that these organizations and platform is aiming to make in view of the developments that are taking place here in the country. Mozambique is blessed with world-class gas reserves in northern Mozambique. But the country is already experiencing a pre-source curse, meaning a curse even before production started due to bad governance, political leadership. What lessons can be derived from peer experiences to Mozambique? As I've said, I have a distinguished but together with me, I have Dr. Joaquim Pereira, the Advocacy Director at the FDC, here today in his capacity of FMO. Não, chama-me, eu vou fazer. The weather is bad today. The weather is bad, and that is affecting our internet connectivity. My apologies for that. So I was saying, I have Dr. Oliveira. I have also Dr. Anibal Mblalango from the Tax Authority. Together with me is also Dr. Marcelina from the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy, our partners in this initiative. I have also my colleague from the extractive industry platform who will be the discussants. So without further ado, I will introduce my distinguished speaker. Todd Moss is the Executive Director of the Energy for Growth Hub, a global research network. He also is a non-resident fellow at the Rice University's Baker Institute, the Colorado School of Mines, and the Center for Global Development. Todd Moss previously served as U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and has worked at the Georgia University, London School of Economics, and the World Bank. He is the author of The Oil to Cash, Fighting the Resource Curse with Cash Transfers in 2015 and African Development, making sense of the issues and authors. Todd's PhD is from the University of London, SOAS, and his MA is from Tufts University. Todd also writes international trailers for Penguin books. So we have, as I've said, a distinguished speaker today. I will hand over to him. Todd Moss, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Professor Nuvunga. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm delighted to talk with you. I was saying before, I wish we were all together in Maputo instead, but maybe hopefully soon we'll be able to do that. I wanted to talk today by talking about something other than gas, starting by talking about the national lottery and the risks of a resource boom. Then I'll talk about some ideas for how countries like Mozambique might avoid the problem of too much money coming from oil or gas, and why it's a little bit like the problem of insomnia for people who cannot sleep. And I also want to then end on one big idea for Mozambique to please consider. So the national lottery, we have lotteries in the US. I know Mozambique has a national lottery. It's a very popular game, and people hope that they are going to win free money. Everyone who plays wants to win big. And we all imagine that if we won millions of dollars or millions of rand, that we would spend it very, very well. We can all imagine all of the things we would buy, all of the people we would help with that money. We'd help our family, our friends, maybe we would start a business. And in general, we are very confident that if we won the lottery, it would make our lives better and we would be very happy. Now, the truth is that the odds are that we would be wrong. The odds are heavily against us. They're heavily against lottery winners. And in reality, studies have shown that winning the lottery is actually sometimes a curse. It's hard to spend lots of money wisely, so a lot of it gets wasted. The normal relationship that you have between working and earning income is broken. You don't have to work to get money, you have free money. And that means the money doesn't mean as much. It loses its value because it was free. Even worse than that, our relationships, the important relationships in our lives, they would all change because everyone knows you won the lottery. So they start calling you on the phone. Family starts calling you, distant relatives that you haven't seen for a long time, maybe old friends, they all come and they all want part of your winnings. Now, maybe we decide to help some, others we decide we won't help, but we don't know if they really love us or if they are just calling us because they want the money. And we quickly become skeptical of everyone. We don't know who to trust anymore because the lottery, our lottery winnings has poisoned all of our relationships. All of our decisions, all of our relationships are suddenly seen through the lens of this lottery money. This is the sad truth that in the end, many lottery winners end up worse off. They're poorer, they're unhealthy, and very often they report being deeply unhappy and that they wish they had never won that money. Now, a country striking it rich with a big oil or gas discovery is a lot like winning the lottery. It seems great, but the adjustment to this new money is very, very hard. All of a country's decisions and all of a country's relationships inside the country and with your neighbors and partners are suddenly seen through this lens of the oil and gas income. It's also hard to spend a lot of money wisely, so a lot will be wasted. And really, everything about politics and economics in the country becomes poisoned by oil and gas money. Now, this is sometimes called the resource curse. And I want to talk about three different phenomena that have been identified as risks of the resource curse. So one is the economic risk. That is sometimes called Dutch disease. And this happens because the incoming of dollars, of hard currency from resource income, it winds up driving out other industries. The dollars come in, that drives up the value of the local currency. The exchange rate appreciates, and that makes it very hard for other businesses to compete. So in Mozambique, if Mozambique wants to export crops from agriculture or manufacturing, or it wants to have a services industry, it has to be competitive with other markets. And that means a lot of things to be competitive, but the local currency has to stay cheap. Those dollar inflows from gas earnings make the local currency expensive. And that's Dutch disease. And that's one reason why it's so hard for economies that have a lot of oil and gas to diversify into other industries. And it's especially a problem because the gas industry, it creates a lot of cash, but it does not create very many jobs. So the gas will not create many jobs in agriculture and industry and services, while the gas income inflow is actually going to help destroy a lot of jobs that are outside the gas sector. So employment in this environment is very, very hard. So a key aspect of the resource curse is a difficulty in creating jobs outside the gas sector. So that's the economic risk of a resource boom. The second is a series of political risks that the professor hinted at in his opening remarks. So in a country with a resource boom, politics becomes all about access to resource revenues. It's not about building a diverse economy, creating jobs, creating lots of industries and opportunities for the people. The politics becomes about controlling the income that's coming in. And that's one of the reasons why sudden inflows, a sudden surge of oil or gas revenue is often associated, not always, but often associated with authoritarianism rather than democracy. It's associated with violent insurgencies and conflict rather than peace. And it's associated with high levels of corruption rather than good governance. These are the risks, the political risks of the resource boom. And then the third set of risks is around social risks. And this is the breakdown, at the heart of it, it is the breakdown of the normal relationship between a government and its citizens. It's sometimes called a social contract, which can be lost or severely weakened. Now, the social contract is the normal deal that citizens pay taxes, and in exchange for their taxes, the government provides services. They provide healthcare, schools, roads, public safety, all of the things we expect from our government. But that free money from oil or gas breaks this deal. When the government gets all of its revenues from an oil and gas company, it has no reason to collect taxes. So I'm very glad we're going to hear from Mozambique's tax authority. So the government doesn't have incentives to collect taxes, and it doesn't even really have to pay attention to its people or the economy. Because it doesn't need to collect taxes from a broad-based economy, because it can just get its funding from the outside, from the gas or oil companies. And this free money from a resource boom, it helps to destroy the incentive for the government to build a robust, diverse economy for everyone. And at the same time, the other side of the social contract is weakened as well. Ordinary citizens become separated from their government. The people don't get much, and they don't have any means to hold their government accountable, because they're not paying taxes. The government is just receiving dividends or royalties or other revenues from large foreign companies. So the free money of the resource boom breaks both sides of the social contract deal. So what are some things that countries can do, countries like Mozambique can do to avoid these big risks of becoming the resource lottery winner? Now, I'm sure that Mozambique is getting lots of advice. Much of it is very, very well-meaning. People want Mozambique to succeed. And I'm going to guess that the main theme people advise Mozambique is around building what they'll call strong institutions. And they may point to Norway as a good example of a country that has had resource booms and very strong institutions. But Norway had 150 years of democracy before they discovered oil. And so telling young countries like Mozambique that they need strong institutions to deal with their gas or oil boom, it's just like telling a person with insomnia. I don't know if you call it insomnia in Mozambique, but a person who has an impossible time falling asleep. People with insomnia, it's like telling them that you have studied their problem and you figured out the problem, and what they need to do is get more sleep. It's correct, but it's not actually useful for solving the problem. The useful question is, how do you actually build strong institutions? And here's the dirty secret from the international development community. Nobody knows how to build strong institutions. No one has a good playbook for that. But there are some tips that can help you. So like people who have insomnia and cannot sleep, there are some tricks that can sometimes work. Maybe you can listen to music, or you can read a book. Now, don't solve your problem, but it might help you fall asleep sometimes. Now, there are lots of things Mozambique can do that will not solve the resource problem, but it will help. The most important is to be transparent. Be transparent about your gas contracts. Be transparent about government spending. I'm just gonna change my light here. Sorry about that. So being transparent is a really important first step. After all, the resource actually belongs to the people, belongs to the citizens, and they have a right to know how the resources are being used. And transparency of contracts, revenues, and government spending is an absolutely critical first step. Now, a second piece of advice that you often get, and I know Mozambique is thinking about this, is using a financial instrument like a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund with clear and transparent rules about how funds are put in, how they are invested, and how they are spent and taken out is a great idea. This actually helps with two different problems from the resource curse. One, by taking revenues, instead of converting it into local currency, but instead holding it offshore in foreign currency, you actually minimize the Dutch disease effect I mentioned earlier. You minimize the pressure on the local currency and you help with competitiveness. Secondly, a sovereign wealth fund also helps by the spending rules. It helps to spread out spending over a slightly longer time. It reduces pressure to spend very quickly, and it helps to save some of those resources for the future. So sovereign wealth fund is a great idea because it will help deal with the very strong pressures to spend all the money as soon as possible, and it will also help mitigate pressure to invest all of the money inside the country too quickly. Using a sovereign wealth fund with good, clear rules can help manage both of these problems. There's a third thing that countries like Mozambique can do, is that if the gas income won't create jobs or boost Mozambique's competitiveness, you can find other direct ways to use your nation's gas that will help make the Mozambican economy more competitive. Examples of using your gas for things other than just selling it to exporting it for income are things like developing cooking gas at home. Cooking gas, LPG, obviously much cleaner and more efficient than burning wood or charcoal. Natural gas is also a wonderful feedstock for fertilizer. And especially gas is good for reliable, cheap electricity. Now, in Mozambique, I looked it up before the talk, only about 30% of Mozambicans have any electricity at home. So Mozambique is going to need a lot more electricity. But even outside people's homes, businesses in Mozambique that have electricity, they have to use generators very often because the power is unreliable. And as Mozambique's economy grows, both homes and especially businesses are going to need a lot more electricity. And to be competitive, that electricity needs to be reliable and it needs to be inexpensive. And fortunately, gas-fired power plants are a reliable source of power. And negotiating with the gas companies and your other development partners to utilize Mozambique's gas to help build a reliable, low-cost power system would be one great way to help counteract the Dutch disease, provide a critical public service, and also help to generate employment. Low-cost, reliable electricity can be a huge while the absence of electricity or unreliable electricity is a jobs killer. And I just want to, before I turn to the last part of my talk, I just want to mention that I'm absolutely sure that many people are telling Mozambique that you don't need to burn gas for electricity. You can exploit your hydro, which you're already doing, and you can exploit solar and wind. That's absolutely true. Mozambique can definitely exploit more solar and wind for electricity. But don't let the West, don't let your development partners tell you that for climate reasons, Mozambique's gas cannot be used at home for its own people, that its gas must be exported to Asia or Europe, and that Mozambique can make do with only hydro, solar, and wind. Actually, gas pairs quite nicely with solar and wind. Gas peaker plants work very well. You can turn them off during the day when solar is high, and you can turn them on at night when the sun is down. So that's gas actually pairs very, very well with variable renewables like solar and wind. So finally, I want to share a bigger idea that might be useful in Mozambique. Now, again, going back to my analogy with insomnia, some people who cannot sleep have found a shortcut. They found that if they can't sleep, they can take a sleeping pill to help them sleep. So what might be a shortcut sleeping pill for oil or gas lottery resource boom winners like Mozambique? It's something we call oil to cash or gas to cash. Now, cash transfers, paying money directly to people, are used all around the world and across Africa for many reasons: to fight poverty, to respond to disasters, and to encourage human capital. Now, here's the idea. Gas to cash is using universal cash transfers by linking it to gas revenues. And the idea is that if the social contract between taxes and public services is broken, you can help to recreate that bond by paying a portion, not all of it, a portion of gas revenues directly to every citizen. Think of it like turning every citizen into a shareholder, and every shareholder or every citizen would receive a dividend, just like if you owned stock on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, here's how gas to cash could work. Step one is that a portion of future gas revenues would go into a special fund. It might be attached to the sovereign wealth fund. It doesn't have to be. Step two is that a portion of that fund, through rules, would be paid out to every citizen on a regular basis. For example, it could go to anyone in Mozambique over 18 years old 2 times a year. And this could be very inexpensively by using biometric ID and mobile money. And step 3 is really the best part. The system that you would build to identify all citizens and to give all of them cash is the same system that can be used for collection. Now, the cash transfer by the government as a withholding tax. And over time, this relationship would strengthen and the government would broaden the tax base to include all citizens. Everyone would be paying taxes because part of their gas to cash dividend would be withheld as a tax. Now, there are many, many benefits to this approach. One, every citizen would immediately see a visible benefit. They would all have money either in the bank or on their phone immediately. Second is that this would make the government very, very popular. Imagine giving even a small amount of cash to every family in Mozambique. You will be very popular. A third benefit is that citizens would then have very strong incentives to pay attention to the gas sector. The incentives for accountability would be strengthened rather than weakened. And finally, government would also have incentives to deliver to the people. The incentives for the government to negotiate well, to receive the funds honestly, and to pay out the funds efficiently would be very strong because every citizen would be a watchdog because they all want to know how much money is coming into their phone. Now, this actually is not transparency of contracts of income and of spending. It's actually a complement. So transparency plus cash dividend think of them as the supply and the demand for good governance. Transparency creates a supply of information for citizens. The cash helps to create the demand for citizens to use that information. Now, national cash transfer programs linked to revenues are already being done in places like Bolivia and Mongolia. India is a very interesting country to watch. They have the world's largest cash transfer program using biometric ID and mobile money. They're paying hundreds of millions of families regular cash payments. And there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from India. So let me conclude by saying that Mozambique is both lucky and unlucky to have bountiful gas. Mozambique could be one of the countries beat the lottery curse. And one way of doing that is by sharing the winnings with all of its citizens and putting the nation on a path to unity, to prosperity, and to development. In so doing, Mozambique would not only beat the resource curse, but would help to build the nation. Thank you. Professor, I think you're on mute.
Very much, Todd Moss. So I was indeed right. We had a distinguished speaker today. You have nailed it in a number of issues, and I thank you for that. Before I hand over to my discussants, I will not attempt to summarize it, but I'd like to pick some of the points that you have alluded to, and particularly you have advocated. The issue of transparency and cash transfers. These two thoughts are simply the key issues that we have been for the past decade advocating for, and no much progress. And you have said clear and loudly that there is no recipe on how to build institutions. But one thing is right, institutions matter. The World Bank has said that long time ago. And your example from Norway, you have emphasized that Norway has done so well because before the boom, they had democracy and institutions in place. Mozambique is blessed with that well-declared gas reserves. We have talked about the economic risks. Those are classic risks. We have learned from the Dutch, but now we're dealing more with the political risks. The political risks, the incentive structures of politicians. Most politicians are short-term horizon. They think in 5-year terms, the political cycles, the next election, and what they need to do to win the next election. But the extractive sector, it requires a longer-term perspective, a longer-term developmental perspective. I've been talking about developmental democracies. We are not succeeding there. And what you see now, we have seen it. Mozambique has cashed now a substantial amount of money from the capital gains taxes. If you look at how that money was spent, the speed at which it was spent, and the opacity within which it was spent, it tells much about the political economy of transparency. The issue of incentive structures. Where will that come from? We are already facing an insurgency in the north, and you see some patterns there. You see government more inclined to protect international oil companies rather than its own people. And you have talked about it. Government with windfall income, they don't care about their citizens. You have talked about it. So, and with all this said, Todd, with all this said, I'm reading the news here. Guyana in America. Yes, with oil, and Exxon is there exploring that blessing, I would say. But they're being hit by lower prices associated with the impact of COVID-19. Mozambique is blessed with natural resources. So it's in a much delicate position compared to Guyana, which is struggling with its own oil. I seem to have heard you say, why don't we consider gas for development? Gas for development, and perhaps in tandem with trying to monetize it. So I have so many questions to you. These were my initial comments. I don't know whether you want to say something about it while I prepare to ask my distinguished panelists to come in. But I would like really to look into that issue, to zoom in, the impact of COVID-19, particularly the issue of demand and oversupply in the market affecting the price, which is far below the break point. How much would Mozambique need in order to pay the investment and then start to have substantial revenue? Perhaps you could say something in that particular issue, because we are talking about how to manage the resources. Lars Ekman from Norway, he seemed to have of cash transfers, but we are still far away from money. We are still discovering. But even before we set them right, even before we set the fundamentals right for Mozambique to monetize substantially that, we are in the. So perhaps you could elaborate on that point while I'm preparing my panelists to come in. Thank you, Todd.
Sure. You want me to answer that now?
Yes, if you could, while I'm okay. Preparing my panelists to come in.
Sure. So COVID-19, obviously, it's a disaster for the economy. It's a disaster for people who are getting sick and for their families. And it's in many ways it's a crisis for the oil and gas industry, because we've seen such a decline in demand and in prices. But for Mozambique's gas sector, for those worried about Mozambique's governance, it's actually it might be a positive thing, because it is going to slow down development of the gas resources, and it's going to push revenue further into the future. How much, I don't know. It depends what happens with the market and with, the finances of the developers, of which I have no special insight into. But the longer Mozambique has to prepare to get the sovereign wealth fund in place, to get the budget transparency issues in place, the stronger the country will be to receive those funds and be able to withstand all of the pressures. So I think that this might maybe Mozambique will buy another year or two where it can start to prepare for the inflow of money. So that I think is potentially positive. But I could not tell you what the turning point, the price is. I would say that Mozambique is in a fortunate position in that a lot of frontier gas fields in Africa, like your neighbors to the north in Tanzania, will probably never be developed. But Mozambique seems to be far enough along that the companies seem relatively committed to that, and the resource is large enough that it looks like Mozambique will successfully develop that. But a lot of your neighbors will never, those fields will probably never be developed. So you might get in there right at the right time.
Thank you, Todd. I will invite my guests. Dr. Oliveira, are you there? Dr. Oliveira, are you there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Please.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Todd. I think, you have presented such a very passionate and didactic intervention on this very interesting issue. I was left with some questions as well, belonging, to a budget monitoring forum and to a civil society organization, and reading through, the narrative of Mozambique before the natural resources or the gas in Cabo Delgado was discovered, and all those issues, came across. I think I have, some few issues, to share, or just to pose, to you for your concern. One fundamental question is that those three aspects that, you have revealed here as being normal, such as, the Dutch disease, the political risks and the social risks associated with that. I have, a question. The question is, are we talking about, the consequences or the effects of not doing or not taking into consideration that what you posed here, or are we talking about the underlying causes of those issues? Let me just explain it, because I think, there are some preconditions in my point of view that put, Mozambique, countries such as Mozambique, in a very odd situation. Similar to what, you have said about, national lottery or the insomnia. And that is the genesis of all that what is Mozambique is living at the moment. I think one thing is you need to look at our default in process of nation building. In terms of building the vision. I think Professor Adriano talked about it. We don't have, as a country, I think, that's very important. That is the beginning of it. As a country, we don't have a connected vision with that. We are looking for what we are looking for, and that is what other people here, are talking about. It is linked, with, and by education, I'm not talking about, schooling itself. I'm talking about what kind of citizen are we trying to create here. And before institutions, I think, it's important, to look at what kind of nation we are yawning as Mozambicans. And if that, is, I think, of belonging and the sense of leadership and all, it will at least, those are one of the preconditions that I think are necessary. You're talking about, building institutions, building strong institutions. And I think, yeah, you're right. And I think, I agree completely with you about that. But what if, those who are, are supposed to be involved in building those institutions are like a club, an elite that, has been governing, an elite that, has been here for many, many, many years with the same purpose, with the same feeling, about, so who is it that going to ask to build those strong institutions? By building strong institutions, I think Professor Jian talked about short-sighted vision, vision linked with elections. That vision or that preparation, that preparedness is also about rigging elections. That's what people are doing. This is what they've been doing, rigging elections to maintain power, to keep in power. So what I'm trying to say here is that I have a feeling that those three aspects that you've posed here, they are right. It's true. You can observe it, you can have evidence of that, but underlying that, I think the underlying causes, the underlying preconditions that are necessary to look at in order to say, well, to predict or to at least build a narrative about what it is that a country will have before having a sovereign wealth fund, as we're saying here. But all in all, I think you're right. We need transparency. In order to have a good developmental narrative in a country that is in terms of natural resources. But all what I want to emphasize here is that a vision of a nation and a vision of a citizen that we want to build, and that what we have to do is important. Is important before we embark on anything that we can do, because without that, I think there are no preconditions that can help us to curb the consequences of abundance actions. Though I think your intervention was very, I would like to discuss more in terms of underlying causes. What is it that makes people willing
as Dr. Marcelina Joel from the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Todd, for your very comprehensive explanation on sharing that experience from. And I think, as I have always said, Mozambique still don't have that resource. We are all in a very high expectation of getting those higher amount of resources from oil and gas. And I know that while we are waiting for that resource or revenues to come, of course, there's a need to put in place the adequate legal framework on the management, on the transparency, on the revenue sharing, because I think I would not consider, as Todd said, revenue transfer. I would rather use the word revenue sharing, because the reason why I'm saying that is because we have to set up a clear mechanism on the sharing of these revenues. The government of Mozambique is aware about the need to take such actions. That's why in the legislation that guides the exploration, the mining sector and oil and gas sector, we have some provisions that give some sign on revenue sharing, on transparency, because you find provisions that state, for instance, that the percentage of revenue generated from oil and gas should be channeled to a local community development. I know that this provision is a polemic one, because today, if you go to the law, it doesn't distinguish whether it's a royalty, production tax, or all revenue generated from that the oil exploitation. So currently we are involved in the clarifying this in the petroleum law. And Mozambique, since 2009, is implementing the ITI with this, and we are now on our 9 reports. Of course, from the first report up to now, there was several issues that has been raised, and we are working on improving that mechanism so that we can also strengthen and improve the mechanism of transparency on the managing all these revenues that we are expecting to have a massive resource. You have given the example of Norway, and I think in my first webinar regarding this, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, I have also mentioned that Norway is a good example, but we cannot just copy straightforward what Norway have to Mozambique, because the reality is different. The population of Norway cannot compare with Mozambique. In terms of development, they have got infrastructures in place. They have got stable electricity, if you want, or power. They don't use gas they use gas mainly to generate power and export, because they are blessed with a lot of hydropower. So I think, and also you have mentioned that they are, in terms of implementation of democracy, they're 150 years. So I like that, because some of the people that I think we can just copy directly others countries' experience and implement your country. You have to look at your reality and get that good practice, but adjust them to your reality. So I know that Norway is doing well. As I said, we have also working with Norway people, and they are very, how can I say, they are very kind on sharing their experience, even with the Minister of Mineral Resources. They have been participating even on the international conference on the Sovereign Wealth Fund that was governed by, the Mozambican Bank. We have had speakers from Norway who have shared their best experience, but they also have to set up the infrastructure, the legal framework, and during certain period of time, they use that money to pay the debts on all this setting up of the tools that they had. So my question is, I know we don't have to wait for all this period, or we don't have to wait for having all in place, do that, and while we are also exploiting the resource. The point is, in terms of percentage, I unfortunately, I have missed your, I think a large part of your intervention. That's why I think I have missed a lot on the experience that you have shared due to the internet problems. But I think I still have questions. When to establish the sovereign fund? Shall we establish the sovereign wealth fund now? And for instance, establish like when that should be enforced? From the day one, we'll get the revenue, or after certain time of exploitation or receiving that revenues. How much to save, for instance, for the future generation? shall we just keep the money there, or there's some projects that can be eligible to multiply the money so that we can have like the Norway, because 24 hours, I went to Stavanger and I saw that museum on oil, and I saw that big globe, which is like a clock. Every single minute money is entering to Norway's revenue, to the benefit of Norway's people. So for them to have that, I think they have taken several steps to reach there. And I think the government of Mozambique is also taking such steps. On the revenue sharing, as I said, we have got some experience that are not well succeed, maybe because we don't have yet the revenues. And the legal framework that is in place today says that money should be channeled to the local community that lives at the area where the operation or the oil and gas operation is being carried out. Is that a right approach? Is any other mechanism of sharing this revenue so that all Mozambicans, they can benefit from that? So the resource curse, about the resource curse, your explanation is clear, but I also think that there's other, how can I say, there's other reasons that may be behind the resource curse, because for us, as Dr. Nuvunga mentioned the other day, I think we're having pre-resource curse, because even before the revenues, before we get the revenues, we're also facing that problem. So maybe there's other reason that we have to find out what are those reasons. And I also liked your tricks that you shared with us, because you mentioned very well that maybe nobody knows well how to manage this, but there's some tricks. For instance, the principle of good governance, the transparency, the revenue sharing mechanism. I think that is all that the government of Mozambique is also step by step taking. That's why currently the government of Mozambique is carrying out this study on the revenue, on the sovereign wealth fund, how to be established, the legal framework that is needed. And I think we are all with the civil society in the same track, because we are all aware that we have to be prepared for how to manage this resource when we start getting it. I think one of the aspects that they should share with these panelists today is that the Minister of Mineral Resources, even before, the civil society start this series of webinars that are very important, we have been discussing about this since 2014. It is not easy to come up with a legal framework that will be comprehensive, that will be adequate to manage all these aspects. But I think the contribution that this series of webinars are giving will be very important for us to place the things before the massive revenue arrives. On the impact of COVID-19 on the sector, I tend to not to be, how can I say, I wouldn't say I disagree with Todd, but I think despite the COVID, we are carrying out this activity to set up the legal framework. I think COVID should not be, it shouldn't, if we were able to carry out the activities, it shouldn't be an excuse for us not to proceed. Or it should be only that opportunity for us to sit down and place the legal framework. I think that is an exercise that is being carried out by the government. And from the extractive industry, that has had a very negative impact, because it will be affect most of the activities that were scheduled to start, for instance, the operations in Area 1 mainly, because the Area 4, in Area 4 mainly, because the Area 1 is still moving, but for instance, the Area 4, there are several issues that it's linked with the COVID-19, so that almost everything is stopped there. So I think in meanwhile, the how can I say, what we can say about this COVID, it has affected Mozambique as other countries, because the dialogue on the legal framework, on the setting up the World Sovereign World Fund, it's being carried out since then. So maybe I would stop from here now, and if it's necessary, I'll come back. And I'm sorry, Todd, for not just copying what we have said. I have changed my, how can I say, I was just sharing my view on that and what I've been experiencing from the sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marcelina Joel from the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Energy. I will invite my good friend, Dr. Anibal Mblalango from the Tax Authority. Over to you.
Boa tarde a todos e mais uma vez, professor, por nos convidar para fazermos parte deste evento. Boa tarde a todos os painelistas e queria começar por dizer que tenho alguma sorte na minha abordagem de hoje, primeiro porque o professor Todd foi muito profundo naquilo que disse, no que diz respeito aos riscos para países que tenham ricos em recursos naturais. E também porque a doutora Marcelina acabou também dizendo aquilo que eu, como parte de uma instituição que é parte do governo, a visão seria a mesma, não seria diferente. Queria simplesmente comentar sobre alguns aspectos que, efetivamente, dos riscos que foram aqui apresentados, esses impactam diretamente, por exemplo, naquilo que é a atividade de coleta de receitas, desde o risco econômico. De facto, se nós não diversificarmos a nossa economia, significa que seremos altamente dependentes de fontes de receita de uma única fonte, que seria do setor extrativo, e não teríamos aquilo que seria a tributação dos rendimentos dos cidadãos. E penso que isso seria um problema sério para o país. E penso que isto é mais uma chamada de atenção para nós, e mais uma vez, esta é que é uma das grandes, um dos grandes ganhos que esta série de webinars está a trazer para nós, vai nos lembrando aspectos que não devemos nos esquecer deles. No que diz respeito a questões como o risco político, também é uma questão que, sendo levado aqui a debate, merecerá, de facto, a atenção devida e cada instituição poderá ver em que ponto, em que situação se enquadra. No que diz respeito aos riscos sociais que aqui foram elencados, nós não devemos perder de vista, de alguma forma, de que o dever de tributar é de todos os cidadãos. Portanto, em nenhum momento nós devemos confundir a receita que formos a receber do setor extrativo como sendo a única fonte de rendimento do Estado. Aliás, esses são recursos esgotáveis. Portanto, nós teríamos um problema sério no futuro, uma vez que iríamos incutir nas nossas sociedades de que não se paga imposto, e quando esses recursos esgotassem, teríamos dificuldades de voltar a dizer às pessoas: não, é preciso contribuir para poder garantir o desenvolvimento do nosso país, que é um dos deveres dos cidadãos. Portanto, mais uma vez, penso que é de louvar esta alerta para que não percamos esses aspectos de vista. Nós, como autoridade tributária, a expectativa é que haja, de facto, a diversificação da economia, de modo que nós tenhamos maior alargamento da base tributável e tenhamos muito mais pessoas para tributar. Há desafios que se colocam também para nós, que é a questão de, eventualmente, diversificarmos essas receitas até naquilo que é a nossa prestação de contas, dizendo claramente que, olha, destas receitas que nós estamos aqui a apresentar, X percentagem vem do setor extrativo, Y percentagem vem dos demais setores da economia. No que diz respeito à questão ao fato de redistribuição desses recursos, a doutora Marcelina também se referiu. Atualmente, há uma percentagem do imposto à produção, que é, no caso, 2,75 nos termos da lei orçamental, que deve ser, de facto, que é canalizada às comunidades. Um dos grandes desafios que se mantém é as próprias sociedades, as próprias comunidades, digo, estarem preparadas para gerir este 2,75%. Porque o que tem se verificado atualmente é que, efetivamente, as sociedades, apesar desses recursos serem elevados, mas por vezes nem são gastos de recursos e por via disso não conseguem usufruir, isto é, gastar naquilo que seriam projetos de desenvolvimento dessas comunidades. Eu penso que quando se fala de distribuir os recursos para os cidadãos, é preciso vermos de que forma nós podemos fazer numa realidade moçambicana. Eu vejo que numa realidade moçambicana, a forma como está estabelecido, que é o 2,75, que é a comunidade planificar e definir aquilo que são as suas atividades prioritárias, o que a comunidade precisa e financiar-se com esses recursos, penso que seria uma boa solução. Tenho algumas questões que, de facto, não percebi, mas antes estava a falar a questão das instituições fortes. Nós, quando falamos de instituições, falamos de um conjunto de funcionários que estão lá e que desempenham as suas funções, que são estabelecidas geralmente em legislação própria. Portanto, quando nós falamos de instituições fortes, é importante dizer até que ponto, ou o que nós queremos esclarecer, o que queremos dizer sobre essa questão de instituições fortes. Porque essas instituições são criadas por leis e têm competências e atribuições próprias. Portanto, é importante que se esclareça isso. Se é um problema dessas instituições não cumprirem com os objetivos pelos quais foram criados, eu fico com alguma confusão relativamente a esta questão. E para terminar, ia falar do Covid-19. O Covid-19, numa das sessões aqui, alertamos que, segundo o estudo do Banco Africano de Desenvolvimento, está a prever, um déficit orçamental de 8% a 9% do produto interno bruto. Nós, enquanto que a autoridade tributária, estamos a notar que, devido à redução de operações no setor extrativo, há muitos bens e serviços que não estão a ser contratados e, por via disso, a nossa base tributária está a ficar um bocadinho mais restrita, uma vez que não temos muitas empresas a operar. Porque esses projetos do setor extrativo, de alguma forma, nos últimos anos, têm dinamizado aquilo que é a nossa economia e, por via disso, tem influenciado de forma direta naquilo que é a nossa arrecadação. Portanto, pensamos que o Covid-19, principalmente no setor do petróleo e gás, nós tivemos situações em que algumas operações, mesmo da área 1, que não chegaram de parar, mas de alguma forma reduziram aquilo que era o seu plano de execução, não cumpriram com o plano de execução. Outros projetos aqui, de projetos que já estão de plano de temani que estão a produzir, também tiveram alguma redução. Tivemos certas minas que, por causa de infecções que foram detectadas, tiveram de encerrar e, portanto, estamos a dizer que o Covid-19, naquilo que é o propósito da autoridade tributária, que por via disso é do governo, de alguma forma está a prejudicar o desenvolvimento da economia. Penso que ia parar por aqui. Muito obrigado mais uma vez ao professor Todd, porque foi, de facto, profundo na abordagem e por esta chamada de atenção, porque estamos a caminho para a produção em 2022, 2023. Penso que temos que tomar o que foi aqui dito como base para a nossa reflexão, planificação, para que melhor possamos beneficiar destes recursos que estão por vir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anibal Mblalango. The key discussants have they have spoken their minds in response to some of your key points. It seems that Dr. Marcelina as well is saying that Mozambique will nurture its own way. Well, yeah, this is interesting to hear. But what we have seen thus far is that the drafting of the law for the Wealth Sovereign Fund did not benefit from civil society input. And when you talk about transparency, it starts from there. It starts from the design of a trustworthy legislation, which has benefited in the drafting from participation of civil society. And that participation also, it needs to be meaningful, meaning that the processes for participation need to be trustworthy, and the mechanisms for inputs, they need to be, and currently that is lacking. And we have talked about that in previous webinars, that is lacking. But I will hand over to Todd to kind of reflect on what has been said, and also taking some of the questions from the chat box that you can read from your laptop. I'll hand over to you, Todd. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Those are terrific comments. Let me maybe just make a couple of points of clarification. First, for Dr. Oliveira, you're absolutely right. You know, Mozambique needs a national vision, and the gas, both the gas as a resource and gas as an income stream, should help to fulfill that vision. Now, what should that be is not for outsiders to tell Mozambicans. But if Mozambique has certain goals that they want to achieve, let's say you want to be a middle income country by a certain year, you want to have full employment, you want to become an economy that specializes in a certain product or a certain sector, all of that, you have to start with your objectives and work backwards. So I would agree with that, but that is a political process within Mozambique that would have to set that out, and I would not look to the outside world to define that. I'm sure that Mozambique has some kind, the government at least will have some kind of goals for 2025 or 2030, and that can be a good starting point. Dr. Joel had some excellent questions about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. So I would say that it's very clear it's not too early to establish it. These things take a while, and you don't want the revenues to arrive before you have the legal and financial systems in place. So, you know, I would not postpone the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the other financial mechanisms related to budget transparency. I would not postpone any of those discussions. But how much do you share for the future? How much do you spend today? That is, again, a national decision that would have to be made through a process. Now, one thing I would say that's very different in Mozambique than in Norway is Norway and Mozambique have different development problems, right? So Norway's development problem is they have an aging old population and they need to fund their pensions for people at the end of their lives. That would suggest that you are very conservative with how you spend and you save as much as possible for the future. Mozambique's development problem is the opposite. You have a very young population and you there is not a very strong argument for today, given how poor the average Mozambican is. It does not make a lot of sense to save most of the money for 20 or 30 years from now. The development needs in Mozambique are today, and you actually want to use the resources, the investments, and a potential cash dividend to help build human and physical capital to help build a more prosperous future. So there's a very strong argument for spending most of the money soon. There, I think you can look to other countries. Ghana, for example, has a future generations fund for its oil. It's only 5%. They are spending 95% of their revenues. Now, I don't know if 5% or 10% is the right number for Mozambique. That's, again, a Mozambican decision. But I would definitely skew toward spending those resources sooner rather than later, as long as you're not going to do it in a way that undermines the rest of the economy, as I mentioned earlier. The other political question, it's not really an economic question, it's a political question, is how much do you divide, not just spending today and spending tomorrow, but how much would you divide between revenues going to government, so government decides how to spend it, how much goes to communities, and we heard from Dr. Anibal that it's 2.75% to communities, and how much would go to individuals. Now, I don't have a perfect number for you on how much would go to individuals as a percentage. That's the wrong way to think about it. The country, so Mexico has more than a generation of experience with direct cash transfers to poor families. And Mexico's example has been copied throughout Latin America. Brazil now has, it's called Bolsa Familia, a national cash transfer program for poor families in Mexico that's very similar to the, in Brazil, that's very similar to the Mexican example. And if you look across Latin America, it's not exactly the same everywhere, but in general, the payments are 20% of the poverty line. So you are not replacing labor income. What you're doing is you're giving families a small floor to just help with the food payments, maybe with school fees, basic amounts. So I don't know what Mozambique's poverty line is, but if it was $1 a day, if it was $1 US a day, that would suggest about $70 US per year per person. And maybe you would do this only to the heads of households. Maybe you would only do it for a child benefit. You would do it just to mothers for every child under the age of 15. There's many different ways to design it. But my point is that there is a lot of experience with cash transfers in lots of different countries and environments that are similar to Mozambique. So instead of looking to Norway's pension program, I would look at Brazil, I would look at India, and I would look at Africa's experience with cash transfers. Malawi has had a lot of experience with cash transfers. South Africa has had a lot of experience. South Africa has both a child benefit and a pension scheme. And from that, you can see what kinds of payments have been helpful to people, have liberated people to invest in business, to invest in school, to invest in the next generation, without having some of the negative effects on the labor market that people might worry about. So I think that there's a lot of experience in the region that Mozambique can learn from. And then just the last, an excellent question from Dr. Anibal about what do we actually mean by strong institutions? And everyone will have their own definition, but what I mean by it when I'm talking about strong institutions in the context of gas revenues is, what are the mechanisms to constrain the government from misusing and misappropriating the funds? How can citizens hold their government accountable? Now, this is where the supply and demand of information becomes so important. So EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, I think has been very successful in providing a huge supply of information about what's going on in the sector. That's been fantastic. But how many Mozambican citizens do you think have ever heard of EITI or would possibly know how to find out information about gas company payments to their government, or even smaller percentage would know what to do about that? So that's where the cash dividend, the revenue sharing, as Dr. Marcelina suggested, what that does is it focuses the minds of citizens, because they want to know, why am I getting $50 per year instead of $100 last year? It helps to really focus attention. And here's where I do think there is one Western example that I often talk about that's very telling, is the US state of Alaska. It's a very small population living way up in the north, very individualist. But since 1982, there's a profit sharing scheme from the state sovereign wealth fund that's funded by oil. Half of the profits, and they smooth it out over an average of every 5 years, half of the profits are distributed to state residents. And it's about it's about $1,000 US per year that every resident gets. Now, living in Alaska is very expensive, so $1,000 is actually not very much money in Alaska. But what it has done is, even in this very rugged, individualist frontier environment, it has created an intense amount of public attention on state finances. There is no state of all 50 states in the United States where the average citizen knows as much and pays as much attention to state finances and to taxation and to oil contracts as the state of Alaska. And it's because of that dividend that has focused everyone's attention. So why don't I stop there, as I'm sure other people will have other questions. I think you're still on mute, Professor.
Thank you so much, Todd, for those considerations. Your point about institutions and your perspective on how to go about the revenues, and your take on ATI. As you have clearly and loudly said, ATI is an important initiative, but it is not yet widely disseminated, and let alone being used by key stakeholders to foster transparency on the one hand, as well as to hold the key institutions to account. But from the chat box, some people are saying these are really brilliant ideas for the management of revenues. But the hard question is how to successfully monetize. When it comes to transparency, is the transparency in between development upstream and the revenue to come. The contracts as they are designed, they are far too reloaded, meaning that revenues for government sets part, it comes much later compared to the companies. And when you factor all the strategies that companies put in place for tax avoidance, then you can have an idea of what it means as to when significant revenue can be expected for Mozambique. Capacity, I'm happy to have my distinguished discussants here. Dr. Marcelina has been performing brilliantly well. Dr. Anibal Mblalango also been performing brilliantly well, not only in terms of knowledge, capacity, but also availability to be here and to engage. This is how you build good governance. But that does not reflect Mozambique bureaucracy. Taxation is not like disease that comes to you. You have to go out there and with the right skills, the right incentive structures that is shaped by elites. I mean, if you have political corruption in a country, that will trickle down to the bureaucracy and the likelihood of civil servants to do things right. So some people seem to be, while they're cautious with this conversation, with the path that you are putting forward as a way of managing well and to mitigate some of the key economic risks. But people seem to be worried with the extent to which the country will really benefit from this. And again, considering the post-COVID economics. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Todd, and I'm happy that you have said that Mozambique is part of those countries, the emerging oil and gas markets, to be part of that window. Glad to hear that. And also, I mean, the developments in Cabo Delgado, despite the conflict, despite the COVID-19, we have seen really decisive push from IOCs to move with the timelines and investments. But, you know, people asking those questions. Will really that wealth ever come? I don't know. Todd, I'd like to hear your thoughts. You were in Zimbabwe. You were in Zimbabwe, and you saw some of these problems there. I mean, you have the Merengue problems in Zimbabwe, and they're not benefiting the people of Zimbabwe. So this is more, and I mean, leading the Energy for Growth Hub. You do research all over the world. You shed some lights on that particular nuance. Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, so I'm glad you raised Zimbabwe, and I have to say I'm very happy to see Joseph Hanlon in the chat box. I was a student in Zimbabwe when Mozambique, Who Calls the Shots came out, and it was very influential early in my career. So I'm very grateful to see him on the line, and his book. Just Give Money to the People. I think that's the title. Just Give Money to the Poor. It was an excellent contribution to this discussion and influenced my thinking a lot. What's been an interesting confluence around the cash transfers and resource curse debate has been that we've seen there's kind of a pro-democracy, bottom up from the people view of that, which I think the Hanlon book well represents as a kind of rejection of top-down development, Western development ideas dominating it and letting people decide how to use the money. A nice confluence with a kind of libertarian sort of freewheeling individualist view that also takes a very similar position. So there's a nice ideological marriage on some of these ideas. And I've certainly seen that evolve a lot in my own country, in the United States, where a concept of a universal basic income was literally unthinkable 10 years ago. And now it's part of the mainstream discussion. It's not happening anytime soon, but it's part of the mainstream discussion today. Look, I think that the issue of, so whether Mozambique, I will not pretend to know enough about the politics and the politics of Mozambique or the intricacies of the deal that the government has with the gas companies right now to be able to predict with confidence when Mozambicans are going to see those revenues, or is it a good deal, or what's going to happen with global markets. I would say that the opportunity is there. I would also add that a lot of countries, and Nigeria is a good example of this, is that a resource revenue country, often the benefits get captured by a tiny elite, and the average citizen sees very few, if any, benefits. And that is the situation that I think Mozambique wants to avoid. That's one of the things that just giving money to the poor helps to short circuit. It's the sleeping pill shortcut I was mentioning, where even if it's just $50 a year, you are putting cash in the hands of people. It's very tangible. They can choose how they want to use it. It doesn't have to be all of the money, but it has to be sizable enough to make a difference in people's lives. And that's really what I think is an important piece. And then just the last point I'll make before turning it back to you, Professor, is you mentioned taxation as coming to get you. And I think people think of taxation as an evil, but taxation is actually the foundation of all modern governance. Without taxation, you have nothing. And so the importance of the taxation system is that it is fair, that it is progressive, that everyone becomes part of that net, even if they're only paying a tiny portion. Even if they receive $50 a year from Mozambique's sovereign wealth fund, and $10 of it is saved by the government as taxes, they're paying $10 in taxes every year. They are part of the tax net. And as their family becomes wealthier, they can be taxed more. And as they earn more income, they can become a bigger part of the society. But that's how you bind people together. And that's how you get people to buy in to the national project. So I don't know if I've answered all your questions, but I hope that that gets you some of the way there.
I see an interesting discussion there on the wealth, on the cash transfers. On the cash transfers, on the cash transfers, Joseph Hanlon, he wrote and he has been advocating for cash transfers as part of the strategy to alleviate poverty. He has written based on the Brazilian experience, but I will try to invite Joe Hanlon to make a comment directly on that particular point, because I seem to be a bit skeptical in the context of Mozambique. How do you do that in the context of Mozambique? Give me a second. I will have John Hanlon in a second. Como fazer isso? O Joseph Hanlon. Sérgio? Joseph Hanlon. Tem já ele aí, né? E adiciona ele. Companhia, deixa assim. John Hanlon, are you there? Yeah, I think Joe Hanlon is already with us. Joe, are you there?
Hello, video. Okay. Some time ago, I wrote a book called Just Give Money to the Poor, which looked 10 years ago at the early development of cash transfers. And I think that there are two things to be said about cash transfers. It's easier to do than almost any other way of distributing money. And Mozambique already does this. Mozambique already distributes money to many older people. Now, the thing that makes it much easier now is M-Pesa and electronic money transfers. Most people have mobile telephones. Most people can set up accounts. You can then spend the money in shops, and it's all much simpler. We also have a history of registering people. We've registered 95% of the adults of Mozambique on the electoral register, for which you had to provide identification and fingerprints and so on. We have a register of 95% of the adult population, which we could use as a starting place. And you can compare fingerprints, and that would prevent duplicate registration. So it's doable. But the main utility of cash transfers is that the money is spent locally. You buy things from local traders, you buy things from local shops, and that money circulates within the community 2 or 3 or 4 times, and that stimulates the local economy, which is really the big gap in Mozambique. The final point is that the crisis in Cabo Delgado, the insurgency in Cabo Delgado, is at least partly triggered by people feeling they are not benefiting from the resources, from the gas, from the rubies. As has been pointed out, the law already says 2.5% of resources should go to local communities. So we could start in Cabo Delgado, and we could start with a cash transfer, which could go to everybody with a voter's card, and say, okay, we will transfer money to you as part of the gas money. Now that would be a start. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. Todd is talking about $1 a week, and that's probably correct. We should remember that the average cash income in Mozambique, rural cash income, is only $30 a year, less than $1 a week, cash income. So that if we added $1 a week from the gas money, this would double the rural income of of a big chunk of the population. So we could do it if Mozambique wanted to do it. But it's a commitment. It's saying, okay, we really want to do something. But that would change, that would transform the war in Cabo Delgado, because suddenly you would be saying to local people, yes, you're going to benefit from the gas money. And Mozambique is actually already nearly set up to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe Hanlon, a good colleague. Joe, but in your recent writings, you have been more vocal in criticizing the captured and corrupt elite. Do you think? And that from your, if you look your writings on Mozambique, you have been more vocal now on the corrupt elite. Will they allow that?
That's a separate question. The point about distributing money that way is it is transparent and it is auditable. Will the corrupt elite allow it to happen? I'm sitting in London. I have no control over that. You're sitting in Maputo. You have the power to influence the corrupt elite, and you can say to these people, let us distribute money. We have all the facilities to do that. We could start next year and do it and distribute money to everybody who has a voter's card. Why don't we do it? And that this would be a way of perhaps reducing the war in Cabo Delgado. But that's Mozambicans have to do that. I can't do that sitting
here. You criticized the 80 million scheme, Fundo de Desenvolvimento Local under Gebuza. You criticized that. What will change now?
Because it needs a political decision that the only way to stop the growing war in Cabo Delgado is to show people locally they're going to benefit from the gas money. And that Frelimo has to be convinced that it needs it to save themselves. Now, this is a hard call, and somehow there's got to be a split of the money between the elites and the people. This is the social contract that Todd was talking about. The social contract in a place like Alaska in the United States says, okay, the local people get some of the money and the government gets some of the money. Now, Mozambique could do that, and it is about the leadership understanding that they actually need to do it, that it's in their own interests to do it, that this is how you would save Frelimo.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joe Hallan, for those contributions.
Professor, can I make one point about this for Cabo Delgado?
Yes.
So I think there's a very concerning precedent that comes from the Niger Delta in Nigeria that I think Mozambique wants to be very careful to avoid. And so what they did in the Niger Delta is, instead of distributing resources to regular citizens in a transparent way, they wound up making secret payments to militia leaders as essentially payoffs to stop attacking the oil facilities. And what that did is it actually incentivized militant groups. The only way, if you live in the Niger Delta and you want access to some of those revenues, the only way to do it was to form a violent group and attack either oil facilities or kidnap oil workers. And that actually helped to make the situation worse. And so in Cabo Delgado, if Frelimo decided they wanted to just pay off militant leaders, or they just wanted to give quiet payments to the headmen of certain areas, what you actually do is you start to create an incentive for worsening violence rather than placating it, and you create these mini. You create strong incentives for further violence, because the violence is what gets you the payments. So the idea, if you were to pay all citizens, you actually then would create an entire constituency that was not reliant on either a militia leader or a headman to pass that money through them, but you would create a much more positive constituency for suppressing the violence rather than encouraging it.
That's why you should do the money for registered voters. That gives you 95% of the adults of Cabo Delgado, and you would bypass all of those people.
Joe Hallon, well, this is not the topic today. We'll organize another debate on that. But listen, we have COVID-19. The government went borrowing. We expected government to quickly move with money for the people to stay home to prevent COVID-19. That did not happen. There were all discussions on using telecoms, using all these mechanisms. That did not happen. What will change? What will be the decisive factor, John Hanlon, to allow that to happen?
It requires civil society in Mozambique and progressives in Frelimo to convince the elite that it's in their own interest that this should happen, or they're going to lose and lose big.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's a topic for another discussion. For the time being, let me go back to Todd and to my panelists. Dr. Marcelina as well, you have been raising the hand, please.
Well, in fact, I did not raise the hand, but it's a pleasure to give some more comments on that. I think we're on the same track, on the same path, but how to draw this path? That is the question. We're in the same track and we're in the same path, but the need to put the dots in so that we have a right path, that's an issue. And I think from what we have heard since this webinar has started, I can say we have learned a lot, the do's and don'ts, which is very important for us to then come up with a legal framework that will be transparent, because it's all about transparency. It's all about inclusion. It's all about people feeling that they're benefiting from the resources that are generated in the country. And the only way to do that is to have a legal framework that is transparent, the mechanism of management that is also transparent. And that, I think it can be done. Of course, the civil society will be involved. I know that Dr. Nuvunga is questioning now the mechanism of the government on the action whenever there's a legal reform or there's a new legislation coming up, the process of having that. I think we have to improve, that is true, but most of the time, I can tell you from inside to outside, we need the law today, but we have to involve other stakeholders. Yes, you have 1 week. We need the law now. So that is most of the time the constraint that we have. So I think that if we continue in this way, as we are doing, exchanging, giving more and more ideas, the best practice from other countries, of course, excluding the worst practice, I think we're in a good way to reach and come up with a adequate legal framework and have all the Mozambicans involved. We have had some experience on the in the past where we have like regional seminars where involving local authority, we're involving the municipality, the local government on the discussion. I think this is the way of doing things. And this will not be something that will be approved in 2 or 3 weeks. So I think we still have time to do that. And also, or most importantly, is not to pretend we're transparent, is to act transparently. That is very good because everybody will see what has been collected by the government and where that money has gone, for what purpose. So if we manage to do that, I think everybody will be on board and we'll have support of everybody. I think I can stop from here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Marcelina Joel. One of my panelists, Dr. Stephen Ferrão, please.
Hello. Boa tarde a todos. Primeiro agradecer a todos os panelistas pelas brilhantes intervenções e ao senhor Todd pela explanação que fez hoje. A minha questão, já agora na parte final, era mesmo de procurar mostrar a inter-relação entre os riscos políticos e sociais, porque se falamos de risco político, a tendência de termos uma maior pendor para a democracia ou autoritarismo, isso também está ligado com a maneira como o contrato social pode se encontrar. Então, era bom que também nas nossas reflexões fizéssemos procurar perceber a interligação entre esses dois riscos e talvez para uma pequena chega, porque falou-se aqui que o governo iniciou os debates sobre o Fundo Soberano em 2014 e a sociedade civil vem agora com essa série de webinars organizados pelo CDD e a plataforma e o Fundo de Monitoria do Orçamento, mas também só queria fazer referência que em 2012, 13, 14, também a Embaixada da Noruega já havia organizado eventos com a sociedade civil, onde tivemos a presença do ministro das Finanças da Noruega e tivemos a oportunidade de aprender sobre o caso norueguês no concernente aos fundos soberanos. Com isso, eu quero chamar a atenção para quê? Que é aquilo que o professor Nuvunga esteve aqui a mencionar sobre a necessidade de incluir os diferentes atores, porque às vezes podem pensar que a sociedade civil não está a par de um determinado assunto, mas nós também temos feito as nossas discussões, as nossas análises como sociedade civil. E nesse âmbito gostaria de, como tem aqui se falado muito sobre a importância de valorizarmos a transparência e a prestação de conta como elementos fundamentais neste processo de construção das nossas instituições. Já isso ligado um pouco ao que o doutor Anibal falou sobre o que seriam instituições fortes. Instituições fortes são instituições que são capazes de cumprir com aquilo que são as suas atribuições e missões, porque não basta só ter funcionários, ter lei lá descrita, mas a sua implementação, quando não atinge aquilo que são os fins pretendidos, assim estamos em presença de instituições fracas e tem um impacto negativo no processo de desenvolvimento. E muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Few final comments. Dr. Anibal, 2 minutes. Thank you.
Mais uma vez, muito obrigado. Penso que muito já foi dito aqui. Nós continuaremos a criar condições para que este planeamento fiscal que foi aqui referido, que pode em algum momento afetar as receitas do Estado, seja evitado. E também continuamos a treinar os nossos funcionários para que garantam que efetivamente o que é a parte da receita que é do Estado seja dada ao Estado. E por fim, sobre a questão de que o Estado receberá receitas muito mais tarde, eu penso que como qualquer projeto de investimento, primeiro é preciso fazer o serviço da dívida e só depois daí é que começa-se a tributar o rendimento. Nós estamos num regime, num sistema tributário que tributa o rendimento. Não obstante, nós temos o mecanismo de partilha de produção e temos o imposto sobre a produção. Portanto, desde o primeiro dia do início da produção, a receita está garantida para o Estado. Relativamente ao do investimento tiver sido recuperado, esses investimentos, como é que serão amortizados, para que, de facto, tenhamos certeza de que as receitas estão a ser cobradas, com a parceria e o apoio de todas as instituições que sempre nos apoiaram, porque, de facto, temos tido essa sorte. Há instituições nacionais e internacionais que se aproximaram da autoridade tributária para ajudar na formação e capacitação dos seus funcionários.
Muito obrigado, Dr. Anibal. Dr. Oliveira, Joaquim, 2 minutes to wrap it up.
No, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I think, this was very, very rich discussion. We had very respected, panelists and discussants who actually, brought about some fundamental ideas about, what it is that Mozambique needs to be doing in order to avoid, or at least to mitigate, the risks that are associated with the abundance of natural resources towards, wealth creation. So I think, this was very insightful discussion. We were left, with 2 or 3 issues that I think we need to take further. One, which is about, the necessity of creating and building strong institutions. I think, this is very key. I want to reiterate, my belief that that should be done in parallel with clear and strong, efforts by all, not just, the government, but by all, but the government as a leading entity towards the creation of that what we think is the citizen, Mozambican citizen. I think, we need to go back, to our values. And if we don't do that, and if we don't get there, I'm not very sure that, perhaps, even if we build, strong institutions, we can reach, beyond what we are looking for. So, the values, the underlying values of that, what we believe, is a citizen that we are looking for is really very important. And I'm not being, idealistic here. I think it's possible. It's possible. When we talk about the reforms in education, we can do it. And when we talk about, bringing in together, an integrated and a holistic approach, to development, we can do it. So it's just a case of political willingness. So building that vision, as well as betting on stronger institutions, is key. It's really very important before we embark on any kind of development. And by strong institutions, we mean turning everything upside down, actually, because, it's where it is. It's not, what is it should be. Institutions, we're not talking about people, we're talking about institutions. So when we talk about institutions, we just talk about values and principles that guide, those institutions, for them to be able to deliver what is meant, to be done. I think, the second aspect that I felt that is an emerging issue of that what we discussed here today is about, the cash for people. I think, cash transfers, I think it's important, for us to look at that, in depth. And I would like, to suggest that, the next series of webinar, this should be, one of the issues that, we need to look at. And I think, that could be a good contribution to taking into consideration the context in which, we are questioning now, the social protection package. We are questioning, to whom, actually, the social benefits or the economic benefits are going as a result of the natural resources that, we have. And I think, this is a good timing for us, to get into a thorough reflection about what it is that, we can do in the future. So thank you so much, for this, and I look forward, to next webinar. And I wish you all well, and I hope, everyone, learned about what we discussed here, and we can take, some lessons and insights, to our future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliveira. People talk much about political will. People talk about political will to get things done, to reform. But how do you create political will? this is the key question. Mozambique's 32 years of democracy with problematic issues. Last year, a key human rights defender was killed. So that's the sort of democracy within which we operate to set right the governance of the extractive sector. What I'm saying is we want to reform to set governance of the extractive sector right in a context where human rights defenders are shot, killed, where offices of independent media houses are burned down, where journalists are prevented from covering what is happening in northern Mozambique. So it's also to add something to our reflection as to where will this very much talked about political will be coming from. Todd, your last thoughts. You know Africa very well. Been to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is governed by a former liberation movement, and Mozambique is also governed by a former liberation movement. Zimbabwe is classified, but I mean,
yeah.
So your final thoughts.
Yeah, so first I would say Zimbabwe was governed by a liberation movement. It is now governed by a small cabal that's more like an organized criminal cartel than it is a liberation movement. So I don't think Zimbabwe has very many lessons for Mozambique on the upside. Only what can happen when a very small group of people control access to the national revenues, in that case, gold and platinum, and then misuse the military for reinforcing those positions. So I would be very cautious about the Zimbabwe example. I do think that that Nigeria, which is a country I work a lot on, and I know people pick on Nigeria. It's one of my absolute favorite places on earth. I think Nigeria has a lot to say positive for it, but the way it's managed its petroleum sector is not one of them. And so I do think those are the lessons there. And I hope that Cabo Delgado does not become the next Niger Delta. And then just the last thing I'll say about political will is we have a little saying among some colleagues that we don't use the term political will. We think that when you say political will, what you're actually saying is that you haven't quite yet figured out the incentives that the politicians face for making the choices that they're making. And this would get back to, whether Frelimo would embrace full transparency of the gas sector, potentially with a gas cash transfer dividend. Yes, it will be a small number of people that will have to make that decision, but what is the calculation they are making of why that would be in their interest? Why would that be better for themselves, better for Frelimo, better for the nation than maintaining secret accounts, keeping the contract secret, and not sharing the resources? And the job of convincing the elite that is in their interest falls on groups like CDD and your colleagues at FMO and elsewhere to help make that case. There are partners in the international community that can help share experiences from other countries. But at the end of the day, it's a political decision that Mozambicans will have to make, and that Mozambican civil society will have to make that case to their government. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to everyone. One nice thing about COVID is that it's normalized using Zoom for people to get together, so we can exchange in a way where maybe it wouldn't be possible. So for that, Professor, I'm deeply grateful to you, and I look forward to staying in touch. Maybe we'll have some projects together in the future. And to all of the panelists, absolutely fantastic comments, both in the chat box and from the panelists. So thank you very much. I'm grateful.
Thank you very much, Todd, for this brilliantly done presentation, discussion, and webinar today. We will keep in touch. We also thank the Energy for Growth Hub for working together. And I extend my gratitude to all my panelists and to all those who have followed. We will continue with our webinar series. The next will focus on South Africa, looking into South Africa's Black empowerment, and with their announced wealth fund of about 50 billion rands, but looking into how the Black empowerment experience was managed ahead of this new solidarity fund to be established as a part of a process to learn and build the critical mass that the country needs to substantially engage in discussion on how to harness the potential that we're blessed with in northern Mozambique. I thank you very much, CDD, FMO, and the platform. They are happy to continue in touch in different platforms, in our social media. You can keep posting the questions and also picking the links of previous discussions. And we end here today. Thank you very much, and keep in touch. Stay safe outside. It is not yet safe, but you have to go out because there is no other way, but be cautious that it is not safe outside. Thank you very much. See you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.